Greetings, brethren, once again, and welcome to our continued discussion on God's storehouse and the principles of tithing. Today we will look at tithing in God's storehouse. And why are Davidians so confused? I mean, this should be a topic that we have an understanding, but there's a good reason for this. So we'll address this respond using the Holy Bible, the Spirit of Prophecy, and the Shepherd's Rod message. Here's a text for meditation that we'll read from the Spirit of Prophecy, Testimonies to Ministers, page 69. It reads, "But we see that the God of heaven sometimes commissions men to teach that which is regarded as contrary to the established doctrines, because those who were once the depositories of truth became unfaithful to their sacred trust. The Lord chose others who would receive the bright beams of the Sun of Righteousness and would advocate truths that were not in accordance with the ideas of the religious leaders. And then these leaders, in the blindness of their minds, give full sway to that which is supposed to be righteous indignation against the ones who have set aside cherished fables. They act like men who have lost their reason. They do not consider the possibility that they themselves have not rightly understood the Word. They will not open their eyes to discern the fact that they have misinterpreted and misapplied the Scriptures and have built up false theories, calling them fundamental doctrines of the faith. Is it possible today, brethren, that leaders today in our midst as Davidians have followed the same thing? That they've lost their reason and they haven't even considered the possibility that they themselves don't understand the Scriptures in regard to the principle of tithing? Well, let's look closely at this. And heed this admonition, that we henceforth no more be children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. Ephesians 4, verse 14. So let us be ever awake, not to be led by winds of doctrine and the sleight of men, especially those professed friends of the faith. So we're asked the question, where should we return our tithes today? Well, for Seventh-day Adventists, some believe that it's to the local church, others think it's to the General Conference, and many do not know for sure, so they're confused. Now, you would think that with the advance of the Shepherd's Rod, that Davidians should know better. But it turns out, for Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, that some believe that they should return their tithes to one of the alleged GAD SDAs, such as Mount Dare or Waco. Some hold their tithes due to apostasy and corruption that they see amongst the many factions of Davidians, and many do not know for sure. So, brethren, is it possible that we can clarify this issue and come to a clear consensus of where we should return our tithes? Well, we certainly hope so. So let us pursue this further and ask the following probing questions. Is there ever a circumstance where we can withhold our tithes or redirect them? Or can a private home serve as a storehouse of present truth? Shall we look in the past and see if there's ever been an example of such a thing? How can we know that God has moved a storehouse? Certainly He's moved it in the past, and so we want to understand the criteria, the circumstances by which the storehouse has moved, because it might move in our day. Will GAD SDAs, which stands for General Association of Seventh-day Adventists, such as Salem, Mountaindale, and Waco, remain storehouses until the end of time? You ever thought about that? So our key text for examination, the scripture that we want to really break down and rightly divide, Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 to 10. And we'll read, it said, "Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, Wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. It turns out that even Davidians failed to rightly divide and understand this verse. So we want to focus and do really a basic Bible study on what is a storehouse, what is meat, and what is a house. We should all know this, and so we'll use the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy to confirm by asking first the question, what's the meat? Because to identify the storehouse, we have to know what the meat is. So the Scriptures tell us in John 4, verses 32 to 34, it reads, And he said unto them, I have meat to eat that ye know not of. Therefore said the disciples one to another, Hath any man brought him aught to eat? Jesus said unto them, My meat is to do the will of him that sent me, and to finish his work. So obviously here the meat is not physical food, but it's something spiritual in nature. And we read here in John chapter 6, verses 26 and 27, Jesus answered unto them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. Labor not for meat which perish, but for meat which endureth into everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. So this meat that we're to seek for endures to everlasting life. It's not physical food, but it's spiritual food that will bring us to everlasting life. And we continue on in Matthew chapter 24, verse 45. It says, Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the Lord has made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? So we understand from the shepherd's rod, this meat in due season is a timely message of truth. And the Spirit of prophecy confirms this in Desire of Ages, page 634. It reads, Those who are watching for the Lord are purifying their souls by obedience to the truth. With vigilant watching, they combine earnest working. Because they know that the Lord is at the door, their zeal is quickened to cooperate with the divine intelligences in working for the salvation of souls. These are the faithful and wise servants who give to the Lord's household their portion of meat in due season. Luke 12:42. They are declaring a truth that is now specially applicable. As Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and Moses each declared the truth for his time, so will Christ's servants now give the special warning for their generation. So this meat is the truth. The meat in due season is the truth that is now specially applicable to God's people. And we know without a doubt that the present truth today is none other than the original shepherd's rod message. So what else is it other than this, brethren? The published tracts of the shepherd's rod. The numbered tracts 1 through 15, miscellaneous tracts, 9 of them, Timely Greetings Volume 1 and Volume 2, 5 answer books, and the symbolic codes, published from Volume 1, Number 1 to Volume 10, Number 2. So this is the meat in due season. And that's what comes from the storehouse. Let's hear what the shepherd's rod had to say. Timely Greetings, Volume 1, Number 28, page 16. It reads, This rod of God not only speaks, but it feeds too. And what can it be if not meat in due season, if not the message of the hour? The people, explains the Scriptures, are those who dwell solitary in the woods in the midst of Carmel. Prophecy for this day and hour recommends the message which the rod contains, which Carmel puts out, none other. Very clear here. It's the message of the shepherd's rod. That's the meat in due season. And how about this from Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Number 30, page 18? It reads, The statement, Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, implies that some are already bringing it into it, but not all. This also, along with the charge that the whole nation is robbing God, positively shows that the tithes are now brought not to God's storehouse, but to some other house. To repeat, God's storehouse has ever been and ever will be where the message of the hour is, where present truth is, the house from which the meat in due season is dispensed at the time the tithes are paid. So, of course, at the time this was written, in the 1940s, Mount Carmel Center under Brother Houteff was the Storehouse. But what about the situation today, where all these rival factions are claiming to be storehouses? They can't all be true because nobody teaches the same thing. Nobody sees eye to eye. So, repeat, the storehouse has to be where the message of the hour is, and that's the original shepherd's rod. That's what we should look for, the present truth. In Jezreel number 9, page 4, it says, note that not to the Levites or to some other place or people, but into God's storehouse are the tithes and offerings to be brought, and for no other reason that this storehouse may be the means to dispense spiritual food, meat due season. These words definitely and positively show that the only support which the message of the purification for the church has for carrying on its work is the tithes and the offerings from his faithful people. And in no other way could the message be dispensed, that in no other way could the expenses be paid. So as the message of the shepherd's rod is to go forth as the leaves of autumn to every grass in the field throughout Laodicea, without cost or obligations, something has to pay for it, and those expenses are paid with the tithes and offerings that go to the storehouse. So the storehouse is where the meat, the present truth, the shepherd's rod message comes from, so that it in turn can go to the house, the Church of God, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Very clear comprehension. So where is God's storehouse? Well, in tract number 4, page 63, it asks the question, and it begins with this statement: the Jewish church, in which reposed the truth up to the time of Christ, was ever to be the storehouse, and the priests were to be its stewards. But when they rejected Christ, they forced God to transfer his storehouse to the little handful who did accept the added message for that day. The unbelieving thereby unwittingly forfeited their stewardship. Their followers who paid tithes to them from then on were diverting the Lord's money from his treasury to his enemies to persecute his people. But those who were God's true people followed the Lamb whithersoever he went, and as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the prices of the things that were sold and laid them down at the apostles' feet. So we see here that when people reject the truth, then God is forced to transfer or move his storehouse into the hands of those that accept the added message for the day. That's very clear. So we need to know what are the criteria for a storehouse, what it should be doing, and recognize that God has moved a storehouse in the past and even on up to the present day. So where is God's storehouse today? Well, it counsels us in the Symbolic Code, Volume 2, number 12, page 9. Our only concern should be to find out where is his storehouse, and then faithfully deposit his money there. And if it is his storehouse, he will, without a doubt, take care of his own. But if he does not care for the storehouse which you think is his, either your conception of his storehouse is incorrect, or he has moved it to another place. Seek, and you shall find. Is it possible today that many Davidians don't know where God's storehouse is, or what they think it is not the one that God has recognized as his, and that he's in fact moved it to another place? So we're counseled, seek and you shall find. So we have to know what defines a storehouse in its most essential element. So what if you follow God's plan in the shepherd's rod and publish this, the shepherd's rod literature? Isn't that by its very definition a storehouse? I mean, you can't be publishing anything else or doing whatever you think, because by definition you would disqualify. You would not be following the specific instructions in the shepherd's rod to give this out. This is the meat, the shepherd's rod literature. No more, no less. Some object by bringing up the idea that a home can't be a storehouse, and they'll bring up this statement from Answer Book 4, page 44, and we'll read it. It says, question: is it scriptural for one to retain and personally use his tithe and offerings to carry on the gospel work in his own community according to his own plans? Answer: Nowhere in the Scriptures do we find permission to use the Lord's money at our own discretion. The only justification for so doing would be sheer inability, for some reason, to send it to the Lord's storehouse. Should one voluntarily, though, engage in such a practice, he would set the wrong example before others, and if following his lead, others assume the same right, their course must inevitably result in seriously handicapping the Lord's work, bleeding and subverting his treasury, and thus disorganizes his work and reducing the church to a mere shell, while her members are hiring themselves as laborers in the Lord's vineyard, helping themselves to the Lord's money and running without having been sent. Well, this is certainly true if you take the tithe money and divert it for your own personal use and do it according to your plans. However, people fail to think and critically analyze this. What if you use a tithe according to God's plan? Not according to your discretion, but according to the prescription that's found in the shepherd's rod. There is a difference, you know. So we should rightly divide the word of truth, rather than be led by cunningly devised fables. So once again, what if you follow God's plan in the shepherd's rod and publish this, the original shepherd's rod? By default, that qualifies the very definition of a storehouse. That's following God's plan, not your own plan. So no, you're not diverting the tithes for your own personal use. You're using it to advance the shepherd's rod exactly how God has told us to do it. There is a difference. So this brings us to the question, can a private home serve as a storehouse? Well, in order to answer this, we can't be ignorant of our past. We should look in history. And sure enough, back in the 1960s, this couple, Brother Harry Warden and his wife Vera, lived in a home in 2020 Edgewood Road, Vista, California. And as it turns out, that just happened to be the location of the storehouse in 1964, and then from 1966 to 1969. Turns out that they had different locations in that period, but it was a private home that was the headquarters, if you will, and kept the original shepherd's rod literature published. So the idea that a private home can't serve as a storehouse is ludicrous. It's been proven in history that it certainly can. Or what about a private rest home? Can that serve as a storehouse? Well, it did when the storehouse moved from California to Salem, South Carolina in 1970. There was an addition to a private rest home that was built in 1946, and Davidians at that time published in this room the original shepherd's rod literature. Here's a picture on the right there of the print shop. It had an offset duplicator and a stapler, and they printed rod track literature right there in a rest home. So there's another example. You don't have to have some, I guess, big camp in order to publish a shepherd's rod. History's proven otherwise. Or what about a cave or a mountain retreat? Have we forgot the history of the Waldenses, the Sabbath keepers during the Dark Ages that hid out in the Piedmont valleys of Italy and lived in homes and had their schools out in the wilderness? And God protected them, and they even had to flee into caves to flee from persecution. And they're the ones that preserved the truth of the Scriptures and trained teachers and had Scriptures and went out and shared the truth. So in the 12th to the 16th century, God's storehouse sometimes was even in a cave. Remarkable, isn't it? And the Yucaipa Association from 1974 to 1986, they were located in Southern California at a private home, 304 Palm Drive, Vista, California. There's some of the literature they published, original shepherd's rod track literature. They had a council. Here's a picture of the council that was elected in 1974, even though they were still following Florence Houteff with the vice president. Nonetheless, they were considered a storehouse solely because they published the original shepherd's rod literature. That's what defined them as a storehouse. Even though they didn't have everything right, they had the right literature. So once again, a private home can serve as a storehouse. So let us, brethren, not be tossed to and fro that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lay in wait to deceive, and believe that the Storehouse can only be in places like Waco or Mountaindale, who don't even publish the original Shepherd's Rod but have altered and tampered it? By default, they are no longer God's Storehouse. Waco never was. And Mountaindale, well, when they stopped publishing the original Shepherd's Rod, the Storehouse moved out of necessity. They failed to advance with the truth. So, in conclusion, a storehouse by its very nature, its very essence, is the place where God's message of the hour is published. Today, this is the original Shepherd's Rod tract literature, whether it be in a private home, a cave, or a van. The location doesn't determine a storehouse. It's what they publish. Think about it. If you follow God's plan to publish and distribute the original Shepherd's Rod message exactly how Brother Houteff did it, then how can you not be considered a storehouse worthy of tithe support? Are we going to let the enemies deprive us of our very existence when we do what God has told us to do and followed His command and not leaned on the arm of flesh? Those who reject this advance of the Shepherd's Rod message to meet the present crisis, to reach 20+ million 70 Adventists worldwide, and continue to justify supporting knockout-blown GAD-SDAs who want to lord over God's heritage, may be in for an unexpected calamity. We've already laid out clearly in previous videos that the only way that's right in the Shepherd's Rod, in the spirit of prophecy, is to reach our brethren worldwide, is to sit up, according to 7 Testimony, page 140, in large part through that other angel that comes down from heaven and joins the three to give it power and force. The fourth angel's message of Revelation 18, which is none other than the Shepherd's Rod, will be done through our publishing houses, the word's plural, a multitude of storehouses. How can we ignore this? It's plainly revealed. So this concludes this presentation about returning our tithes to the storehouse that published the original Shepherd's Rod, not according to our discretion, but according to God's express written will in the original Shepherd's Rod. So if you have any further questions or comments, please subscribe to this YouTube channel below. Like this video for future updates. We'll continue presenting on the storehouse and why the advantage of having multiple storehouses versus consolidated the work in one location. If you want to request copies of the original Shepherd's Rod publications or historical documents for your own study investigation, please let us know. Or if you want to speak with a Bible worker familiar with the original Shepherd's Rod message, please feel free to contact us anytime. Our email, upa5453@gmail.com, or you can call us 860-798-3672, or visit one of our websites, shepherds-rod-speaks.org, or upa7.org, or yparish.org. All of them set up to facilitate the advance of the original Shepherd's Rod message. We thank you for your time, and may you trust in God and cease ye from the arm of flesh. Godspeed.